My father's first words on entering Westminster Abbey yesterday were a pledge of service. It was a pledge to continue to serve, because for over 50 years, in every corner of the UK, across the Commonwealth and around the world,
she will not grow old. That fact does not change, no matter how many more birthdays pass without her, no matter how many more grandchildren grow into names built from hers. But the values she spent her short life trying to model, presence over performance, dignity over distance, showing up rather than simply speaking about showing up, evidently did not stay behind on that island at Althorpe. They travelled forward, into a life she never got to see, carried by a son who was 15 years old the last time he needed her, and who is now old enough himself to decide, birthday after birthday, exactly how he wants to keep her close, quietly, consistently, without ever needing the world's permission to do it. On the 1st of July, 2026, Princess Diana would have turned 65 years old. It is a birthday she never reached. Somewhere in a parallel version of this year, she is a grandmother of 3, silver at the temples, still restless, still impossible to predict. In this version, the one that actually happened, she has been gone for nearly 29 years, and the boy who once walked behind her coffin is now a 44-year-old man standing in a cathedral in Edinburgh, wearing the robes of an order older than the monarchy's memory of grief itself. This is not a story about a single grand gesture. There was no press conference. No sweeping statement issued from Kensington Palace declaring how the nation should feel. What actually happened across the days surrounding Diana's 65th birthday was smaller than that, and stranger than that, and in its own way, more revealing than any statement could have been. It happened in 3 separate moments, spread across for months, each one quiet enough that you could miss it if you weren't watching closely. Put together, they tell you almost everything about how Prince William has chosen to carry his mother forward, not as a symbol the monarchy performs, but as a private inheritance he keeps returning to on his own terms, year after year, in the same specific week every summer. To understand why any of this matters, you have to go back to who Diana actually was, and how she was lost. She was born Diana Frances Spencer on the 1st of July, 1961, at Park House on the Sandringham estate in Norfolk, into a family with centuries of ties to the aristocracy and, as it happened, to the royal family itself. She married the Prince of Wales in 1981, in a wedding watched by an estimated global television audience in the hundreds of millions, and she gave birth to William in June of 1982 and Harry 2 years later, in September of 1984. For the next decade and a half, she became something the British monarchy had never quite produced before, a royal figure who seemed to feel things in public, who let the cameras catch her crying, laughing, kneeling down to a child's eye level instead of standing over them. The wedding itself is worth pausing on, because it set the scale of everything that followed. A 20-year-old former nursery school assistant, marrying the heir to the throne inside St. Paul's Cathedral, in a dress with a 25-foot train, watched by a congregation of thousands and a broadcast audience that dwarfed almost anything else in television history at the time.
When you have something so traumatic as the death of your mother when you're 15, as very sadly many people have experienced, and no one wants to experience, it leaves you, it'll either make or break you, and I wouldn't let it break me.
Within a few years, the fairy tale framing the press had built around that day had already begun to crack, as reporting around the marriage's private strain started to surface, and Diana herself grew visibly more independent of the institution she had married into. What replaced the fairy tale, gradually, was something the monarchy hadn't really had before. A senior royal who was more popular, in raw public affection, than most of the family she'd married into, and who seemed to know it, and use it, deliberately. By the mid-1980s she was already testing the limits of what a royal was allowed to touch. In 1987, at a time when public fear and misinformation about AIDS were still severe enough that some believed the virus could spread through casual contact, Diana was photographed shaking hands, without gloves, with a patient at the Middlesex Hospital in London. It was a small gesture and a deliberate one, aimed squarely at the stigma surrounding the disease, and it is still cited today as one of the moments that measurably shifted public attitudes. A decade later, in January of 1997, only months before her death, she walked through a field in Huambo, Angola, that had been partially cleared of landmines, wearing a visor and a flak jacket, to draw the world's attention to a humanitarian crisis that governments had been slow to act on. In between those two moments and around them, she brought her sons into hospital wards and homelessness shelters, not for the cameras, but because she wanted them to see, directly and without a filter, people the rest of their world was trained to look past. On the 31st of August, 1997, she died in a car crash in the Pont de l'Alma tunnel in Paris. She was 36 years old. William was 15. Harry was 12. 6 days later, on the 6th of September, 1997, her funeral procession moved from Kensington Palace to Westminster Abbey, and the image of the two boys walking behind their mother's coffin through streets lined with an enormous, grieving crowd, watched by a television audience stretching across the globe, remains one of the defining images of the British monarchy in the 20th century. In the days between her death and the funeral itself, mourners had left so many bouquets outside Kensington Palace and Buckingham Palace that the flowers reportedly formed drifts several feet deep, a scale of unscripted public grief the modern monarchy had never had to absorb before, for a woman who technically no longer even held the title of Her Royal Highness at the time of her death, having relinquished it as part of her divorce settlement the year before. The public didn't appear to care what her official title was. They came out anyway, by the millions, for a woman who had spent the previous decade and a half quietly convincing them she was one of the few royals who actually saw them. Both brothers have spoken, in the years since, about what that walk cost them. William has described feeling a kind of numbness that day, a sense of simply moving through it rather than experiencing
Wouldn't let it break me. I wanted it to make me. I wanted her to be proud of the person I would become. I didn't want her worried or her legacy to be that, William or Harry were completely and utterly devastated by it, and that all the hard work and all the love and all the energy that she put into us when we were younger would go to waste.
Harry, in a later interview, put it more starkly, saying that he didn't think any child should be asked to do what he and his brother did that day, under any circumstances, and that he didn't believe it would happen the same way today. Whatever the precise language either of them has used over the years, the underlying fact hasn't moved. Two boys, aged 15 and 12, grieved a parent in front of the entire world, with no real choice in the matter, and both of them have carried some version of that experience into every public appearance they've made since. There is one more verified detail worth placing here, early, because it quietly threads through everything that follows. When William and Catherine's second child was born in May 2015, they named her Charlotte Elizabeth Diana, a name made public at the time of her birth and never hidden or downplayed since. It means that in every formal reference to the princess, in court documents, in school registers, in whatever she is called on the day she eventually takes on public duties of her own, her grandmother's name is already built directly into hers. That is not a detail William had to manufacture or protect. It has simply been true, publicly and unambiguously, since 2015, sitting quietly underneath every one of the more visible tributes that followed in the years after. She is buried at Althorpe, the Spencer family's ancestral estate in Northamptonshire, on a small, private island in the middle of an ornamental lake. The location was chosen by her brother, Charles Spencer, who was concerned that a conventional grave would draw more visitors than could reasonably be managed, and who wanted, in his words at the time, somewhere his sister could finally have some peace. Nearly 3 decades on, that island remains one of the only places connected to Diana that neither the public nor the palace can fully reach. It has no visiting hours, no official protocol, no institutional fingerprints. It is simply hers. That is the weight a 65th birthday carries when the person never gets to have it. It is not simply another year gone. It is the version of Diana the country never got to meet, a woman in her 60s, presumably still outspoken, presumably still uncomfortable for an institution built on restraint, presumably a grandmother to 3 children who will only ever know her through photographs and other people's memories rather than through her own voice. Every one of those milestones she doesn't get to reach becomes, in its own quiet way, something the people who loved her have to reach on her behalf, year after year, for the rest of their lives. It is worth pausing here, before getting into what William actually did, to notice something about the country he did it in. Nearly 3 decades on, Diana's birthday still generates its own quiet weather system of coverage every year, without anyone in a palace press office needing to schedule it. Local and national outlets mark the date on their own initiative, revisiting her charity work, her marriage, her sons, the particular way she made an entire country feel, rightly or not, like it had some personal stake in her life. That kind of unprompted, decades-long public memory is rare for anyone, royal or otherwise. It says something about how deep an impression she left that a nation still pauses, unbidden, every 1st of July, for a woman most of the population never met and who has now been gone for longer than she was ever alive to the public in the first place. Most public figures fade from that kind of collective attention within a decade or two of leaving the stage, let alone of dying. Diana, by contrast, seems to have settled into something closer to permanent residence in the national memory, revisited every summer not because an institution insists on it, but because enough ordinary people, editors and readers alike, still choose to. So the question worth asking isn't whether William marked the day. Of course he did. The real question is what he chose to do this year, on this particular birthday, and what that choice, set against the two before it, tells you about a man who has spent almost 3 decades learning how to grieve a global icon while also just trying to be someone's son. The answer starts, unexpectedly, in Aberdeen, on the evening before the birthday itself. On the 30th of June, 2026, the day before what would have been his mother's 65th birthday, William posted an update to the Instagram account he shares with Catherine, the Princess of Wales. There was no mention of Diana in the caption. There was no sentimental framing, no direct address to the significance of the date. What there was, instead, was a photograph of William at Langsdane Housing Association in Aberdeen, one of 6 flagship locations for Homewards, the homelessness initiative he founded through the Royal Foundation. He was there to mark the completion of new homes delivered through the city's innovative housing project and to help prepare welcome packages, the kind filled with the ordinary items a person needs to feel like a space is actually theirs, rather than simply a roof. The caption read simply, "A home to come back to." If you didn't know the date, you might have scrolled past it entirely. Just another royal engagement, another photo of a prince in a hard hat or a housing office, the sort of content that fills royal social media most weeks of the year. But the timing was not incidental, and it wasn't new. This was, in fact, the 3rd year running that William had chosen to mark a Homewards milestone in the exact same window as his mother's birthday. Homewards launched in June 2023, a 5-year program built around a deliberately stubborn ambition to make homelessness in the UK, wherever it happens, rare, brief, and something that never happens again to the same person. From the beginning it was structured around 6 flagship locations chosen to represent different kinds of communities across the country: Aberdeen, Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole, Lambeth in South London, Newport, Sheffield, and Northern Ireland. Each location built its own coalition of local councils, housing associations, charities, and businesses, and each received up to £500,000 in seed funding across the life of the program to develop and test its own model for prevention. The scale of what had been built by that first anniversary is easy to understate if you only skim the headlines. In its first 12 months, Homewards convened 539 individuals and organizations across the 6 locations, drawing in 11 industry partners offering expertise and in-kind support, including a commitment from the retailer Homebase to provide furnished starter packs for people moving into new homes, the same kind of welcome packages William would later be photographed helping to prepare in Aberdeen. Roughly 100 homes for people experiencing homelessness were already in the pipeline by that point, built through what the program calls its innovative housing projects, the same initiative behind the completed Aberdeen homes William visited on the eve of the 2026 birthday. Major firms including Arup, IKEA, Knight Frank, and the law firm Freshfields Bruckhaus Doehringer joined as the program grew, lending resources and professional expertise rather than simply writing checks, in keeping with William's own description of the project as something that has to be built collaboratively or not at all. A year after launch, in July of 2024, William marked the program's first anniversary at an event in Lambeth, bringing together representatives from all 6 locations, more than 500 individuals and organizations who had joined the coalitions in that first 12 months alone. A year after that, in July of 2025, he marked the 2-year anniversary with a visit to Sheffield, where he sat on a panel alongside the former Prime Minister Gordon Brown and the entrepreneur and Homewards advocate Stephen Bartlett, and met members of the programme's National Lived Experience Group, people who had experienced homelessness themselves and were now helping shape the initiative from the inside. Coverage of that Sheffield visit noted, almost in passing, that the date happened to be Diana's birthday, and that homelessness had been a cause she introduced her sons to directly, taking them into shelters as boys, decades before either of them had any public platform of their own. There is a detail in that structure worth sitting with for a moment. Homewards was never designed to run forever. It was built, deliberately, as a 5-year program, meant to prove a model could work well enough in 6 specific communities that it could then be picked up and repeated elsewhere in the country, and eventually beyond it, without needing William's personal involvement to sustain it indefinitely. That means the 3rd anniversary in 2026 was not simply another milestone in an open-ended royal patronage of the kind the monarchy has produced for generations, the sort of charitable association that exists mostly as a name on a letterhead. It was the 3rd marker in a countdown, a project explicitly closer to its intended end than its beginning, being measured the whole time against a self-imposed deadline rather than left to drift. Diana's own charitable work rarely had that kind of built-in urgency. Landmine clearance and AIDS awareness were causes measured in decades, not in a 5-year clock. Her son, working the same instinct into a different shape, appears to have decided that urgency itself, a fixed timeline, a demand for measurable proof rather than indefinite goodwill, is part of what makes the tribute meaningful rather than ornamental. By the time the 3rd anniversary arrived in 2026, the pattern was no longer a coincidence anyone needed to point out. It had become something closer to a tradition, unannounced and never explicitly framed as one. Every year, on or around the 1st of July, William puts himself back in front of the exact cause his mother handed him, in one of the same 6 communities Homewards was built around. This year, that meant Aberdeen, the location where the program had spent its first 12 months focused on understanding 2 of the drivers of local homelessness he cares most about, relationship breakdown and youth vulnerability, before moving into the harder work of building housing and support networks around both. The connection between William's own commitment and his mother's example is not sentimental guesswork. In a 2024 documentary made about the program's first year, William was candid about why the issue matters to him personally, and about the scale of what he's trying to do. He told an interview that everyone having a right to a safe and stable home benefits the whole of society, and that he comes to the work with no other agenda than trying, as directly as he can, to help people in need. He has also been blunt that the effort can't succeed as a single man's project, however prominent that man happens to be. Asked in the same documentary about the scale of the ambition, he said plainly that he likes a big challenge, but that he can't do it alone, a small admission that cuts against the usual image of a royal patron simply lending a famous name to a cause and stepping back. In other public remarks about the program, he has pushed back against the idea that homelessness is simply a housing problem to be solved with enough new buildings, insisting instead that it is fundamentally about people, about the mental health crises, domestic abuse situations, and moments of youth vulnerability that tip a life toward the street in the first place. That same documentary captured one of the more pointed moments of the entire project, when the social entrepreneur and campaigner Lord Bird, founder of The Big Issue, sat across from William and told him there was no room in this kind of work for the sort of empty language that usually surrounds royal charity patronage. It was a blunt challenge to deliver to a future king, and William's response, both in that conversation and in the years of unglamorous coalition building that followed it, was not to argue the point but to keep showing up to the same 6 communities, year after year, long after the cameras from the documentary crew had gone home. Homewards has since drawn in advocates from very different corners of public life, among them the firefighter-turned-campaigner Sabrina Cohen-Hatton, who rose from sleeping rough as a teenager to one of the most senior ranks in the UK fire service, and the entrepreneur Stephen Bartlett, both of whom have appeared alongside William at Homewards anniversary events in the years since launch, alongside people with direct, lived experience of homelessness helping to shape the program from within, rather than being spoken about from a distance. It's worth stepping back, for a moment, to compare this approach with the more conventional way institutions typically handle the memory of someone like Diana. The usual playbook is fairly predictable: the commemorative coin, a statue unveiling, a documentary timed to a round number anniversary, an official portrait, a museum exhibit assembled by curators who never met the person they're presenting. Those things have their place, and the monarchy has done versions of all of them for Diana over the years, including a bronze statue unveiled in the sunken garden at Kensington Palace on what would have been her 60th birthday in 2021, sculpted at William and Harry's joint request and unveiled by the two of them together during a rare moment of public unity between the brothers. But a statue, however well-intentioned, is a fixed thing. It says something about a person once, and then it simply stands there, unchanging, for the rest of time. What William has built instead, across these 3 consecutive years of quiet Homewards visits and a single wildflower photograph, is closer to a living relationship with his mother's memory than a monument to it. A statue can't grow. A 5-year housing program, moving from Lambeth to Sheffield to Aberdeen, one flagship location at a time, can. It changes shape every year, the way an actual ongoing relationship would if death hadn't cut this particular one short at 36. There is something almost too fitting in the detail that the Kensington Palace statue itself shows Diana surrounded by 3 children, meant, according to the description released at the time, to represent the universality and generational reach of her work rather than any specific family members. The garden around it was replanted with thousands of individual flowers, including forget-me-nots, said to have been her favorite, alongside roses and tulips chosen to bloom across different points of the year rather than all at once. Diana's brother and both of her sisters stood alongside William and Harry at the unveiling in 2021, one of the last moments the wider Spencer and Windsor sides of her family appeared together in public before the brothers' relationship grew far more distant than it had been that day. Even a fixed bronze memorial, it turns out, was built with an eye toward things that change with the seasons, flowers timed to keep appearing across the calendar rather than fading after a single unveiling. It is, in hindsight, not so different a philosophy from the one behind Homewards itself, less a single monument than a slow, deliberately renewing thing, built to keep producing something new every time the date comes back around. None of that framing appeared from nowhere. William has spoken over the years about where his commitment to this specific cause comes from, and it traces back to the same childhood that produced the numbness he still describes when he talks about his mother's funeral. Diana didn't simply write a check and attend a gala for homelessness charities, the way a lot of royal patronage of the era tended to work. She sat with people. She let her son see her do it, in hostels and shelters most of the country never had reason to enter, at an age when neither boy could have articulated why it mattered, only that it clearly did to her. Homewards, 20-some years later, is not a tribute to that instinct. It's a continuation of it, run by the same boy who was in the room for the original lesson, now grown into someone with the resources and the public platform to build something lasting out of it. Which is, in its own way, the whole point of what happened on the eve of this particular birthday. William didn't choose to mark his mother's almost birthday with a tribute about her. He chose to mark it, for the 3rd year running, by doing the thing she taught him to do. And if that sounds like a small distinction, sit with it for a second, because it isn't. A statement about Diana is about Diana. A visit to a housing association in Aberdeen, on the eve of the day she was born, quietly continuing a 5-year program rooted in the exact values she modeled for him as a boy, is not a tribute to Diana. It's the closest thing to still being taught by her that a person can experience 29 years after losing her. But the Aberdeen visit wasn't the only appearance that week. The following day, on the actual date, William was photographed in Scotland at an event with nothing to do with homelessness at all. And the contrast between the two says almost as much as either moment does on its own. On the morning of Diana's 65th birthday, William attended the Order of the Thistle service at St Giles, a cathedral in Edinburgh, one of the most historic ceremonial occasions in the Scottish calendar. The order itself dates back to 1687, revived under King James VII of Scotland, and remains Scotland's most senior order of chivalry, its membership deliberately kept small and reserved for individuals recognised for distinguished public service to the nation. The order's motto, rendered in Latin on its insignia, translates roughly as "No one provokes me with impunity," a defiant line dating back to medieval Scotland that has nothing whatsoever to do with grief and everything to do with sovereignty, deterrence, and continuity, the very opposite instincts from the ones that shape a private family photograph or a quiet visit to a housing project. That is precisely the kind of ceremonial machinery Diana herself often chafed against during her marriage, the sense of ritual existing for its own preservation rather than for any person inside it. It is not lost on anyone who looks closely that her son now moves through that exact machinery every summer. In the same week he privately keeps her memory alive somewhere else entirely. William has held the title Prince of Wales since September 2022, when Queen Elizabeth II died and his father ascended the throne as King Charles III, a transition that also passed the historic Scottish title of Duke of Rothesay down to William, along with the Duchy of Cornwall and its associated estates and responsibilities. That handover happened barely 25 years after Diana's funeral, meaning William inherited the very titles his mother once held by marriage, and then lost, in the years before her death, at almost exactly the point in his own life when he might otherwise have been settling into a quieter, more private middle age. While in Scotland, William carries that title, Duke of Rothesay, and he arrived at the cathedral dressed for the part. A deep green velvet robe, and a black hat crowned with white ostrich feathers, the traditional dress of the order. He stood alongside King Charles III, Queen Camilla, and Prince Edward, the Duke of Edinburgh, in a service steeped in exactly the kind of institutional ceremony that the monarchy has always used to project continuity and permanence, regardless of what else is happening in any individual member's private life that week. Here is where it gets interesting, if you let yourself notice it. On the day before his mother's birthday, William was in a housing office in Aberdeen with his sleeves rolled up, helping pack welcome boxes for families moving into new homes. On the day of her actual birthday, he was in green velvet and ostrich feathers inside a cathedral that has stood for centuries, standing beside the king. Two versions of the same sun, separated by less than 24 hours. One shaped entirely by what his mother taught him privately, in shelters and hospital wards decades ago. The other shaped entirely by what the institution requires of him publicly, the same institution Diana spent much of her adult life quietly, and sometimes not so quietly, pushing against. Nobody scheduled it as a contrast. It happened simply because that is what William's life actually looks like now. The same week holding both the informal, values-driven work Diana handed down to him, and the formal, ceremonial duty the crown demands regardless of what day it happens to fall on. It would be easy to read the Order of the Thistle appearance as pure coincidence, an unavoidable date on the royal calendar that simply happened to land on his mother's birthday. Maybe, on paper, it was. But William has never treated significant dates as things to simply get through, and the pattern of the last 3 years suggests he's found a way to hold both halves of that week at once, the ceremonial and the personal, without needing either one to cancel the other out. Which is what makes a third moment, one that happened months earlier and had nothing to do with any official calendar at all, worth circling back to. Back in March of 2026, on UK Mother's Day, William posted something to the same shared Instagram account, something that had no connection to any Homewards event or state ceremony whatsoever. It was a photograph from his private family collection, never shown publicly before that day. It showed Diana crouched down in a field of wildflowers and red poppies at Highgrove, the family's home in Gloucestershire, wearing a simple pink jumper over a white shirt, smiling at whoever was holding the camera. Beside her stood a 2-year-old William, taking in the flowers with the kind of unself-conscious wonder only a toddler has. The photograph was taken in 1984. It had sat, unseen by the public, for 42 years. The caption, signed simply with the letter W, read, in part, "Remembering my mother, today and every day." He went on to acknowledge that days like Mother's Day can be difficult for anyone missing someone they love, and closed with a wish for a happy Mother's Day to others marking the occasion in their own way, whatever that looked like for them. There is something worth sitting with in the specific choice of image. Not a formal portrait. Not a photograph of Diana at a hospital or a landmine field or a state occasion, the images the world already owns 1,000 versions of. A field of wildflowers. No palace backdrop, no formal dress, no cameras beyond whichever family member happened to be holding one that particular afternoon in 1984. Just a mother and her toddler, in a quiet corner of a home that no longer belongs to that side of the family in the same way it once did. It is the kind of photograph you only have access to if you were the 2-year-old in it, or if someone in that family trusted you enough to keep it, unpublished, for over 4 decades before deciding the world could finally see it. That decision, to release something so unguarded, so far removed from the polish of official royal photography, tells you something about how William has come to think about his mother's memory. For years, the world's access to Diana was managed by newspapers, biographers, and documentary crews, people who never knew her and built careers on interpreting her anyway. What William did in March, and again in his own quieter way on the eve of her birthday in July, was carve out a different kind of access. Not the iconic Diana of magazine covers and museum retrospectives, but the barely public Diana of a Tuesday afternoon in a field near Highgrove, existing for exactly as long as it takes a photograph to be taken and then folded away for 42 years before anyone outside the family sees it. Put the 3 moments side by side and a shape starts to emerge, one that repeats itself with small variations year after year. In March, a private photograph, offered on his own timeline, on a day that belongs to every mother rather than to Diana specifically, framed as something universal rather than exclusive to his own grief. In late June, a visit to a housing project, timed as it has been for 3 years running to land on the eve of her birthday, saying nothing about her directly but built entirely out of the values she instilled in him as a child. And on the birthday itself, a formal, ceremonial appearance that, this year, happened to fall in Edinburgh, a reminder that grief doesn't get a day off from institutional duty just because the calendar lines up. None of these 3 things, on their own, would make much of a headline. That may be exactly why, taken together, they tell you more than a single grand gesture ever could. A grand gesture is designed to be seen. These were not. The Mother's Day photograph was offered without fanfare, buried in a caption a single sentence long. The Aberdeen visit made no reference to the date at all, even though the pattern across 3 consecutive years makes clear the timing was never accidental. The Order of the Thistle appearance was simply where William was constitutionally required to be that week, whether or not it happened to fall on his mother's birthday. If you were looking for a press release insisting the nation grieve alongside the royal family on cue, you didn't get one. What you got instead was closer to how most people actually carry loss, inconsistently, privately, sometimes formally, and sometimes not, showing up in a housing project 1 year in Lambeth, the next in Sheffield, the next in Aberdeen, because a 5-year program built to outlast any single anniversary keeps moving forward regardless of what day it happens to land on. There is also something worth noting in what William did not do, this year or in the 2 before it. He did not stage a public visit to Althorpe for the cameras. He did not issue a statement on behalf of the family reflecting on what his mother's legacy means to the monarchy as an institution. Whatever private thoughts he carried that week, about the mother he lost at 15, about the grandmother his own 3 children will only ever know through photographs and stories, stayed exactly that. Private. The only parts the public saw were the parts that came wrapped inside something else entirely, a housing initiative, a centuries-old church service, a photograph offered up months earlier on a different, more universal day of remembrance. William was not the only one of Diana's sons marking the date. Harry, according to reporting around the same period, was expected to be in the UK that week for events connected to the 1-year countdown to the Invictus Games in Birmingham, and was said to be planning to visit his mother's grave at Althorpe with his own children, Archie and Lilibet, in the days just after her birthday. None of that has been confirmed in detail, and it sits at a much lower tier of certainty than William's Instagram posts or his public appearances in Aberdeen and Edinburgh, which are a matter of public record. But it points to something true regardless of the specifics. 2 brothers who once stood together, matched in grief, walking the same distance behind the same coffin, now mark their mother's memory from very different places, one still fully inside the institution and its calendar of ceremonial obligations, the other having stepped outside it, choosing a private visit to an island grave over any public engagement at all. Neither approach cancels the other out. If anything, The contrast is a reminder that there was never only one correct way to carry this particular loss, only the way each of them has found workable, separately, since they were boys. That instinct, to root grief through service rather than spectacle, did not appear out of nowhere. It is, in its own roundabout way, one more thing Diana handed down to her son. She was, by nearly every account of people who knew her, someone who processed her own complicated life not by making declarations about it, but by pouring herself into causes, AIDS patients treated with the same warmth as anyone else at a moment when that warmth was itself a kind of protest, landmine survivors given a global platform months before her own death. Homeless Londoners shown that a passing royal could sit down next to them rather than simply nod from a distance. She rarely explained herself in grand statements either. She let the work speak for the values behind it. Watching her eldest son mark her almost birthday the same way, 3 years running, through a housing project rather than a press conference, is less a coincidence than it looks. It's closer to muscle memory, something learned so early in childhood that it doesn't need to be consciously performed anymore. It simply is how he moves through a difficult week now, at 44, the same way it was how she moved through her own causes, at roughly the same point in her adult life that she never got the chance to reach. Diana never made it to 65. She never became the grandmother her 3 grandchildren might have known instead of imagined. She never got to see Homewards, or anything like it, exist in her son's name, built on the exact instinct she planted in him as a boy standing beside her in shelters he was too young to fully understand at the time. She never got to watch a granddaughter grow into a name that carries her own inside it, never got to see whether that granddaughter would inherit anything of her particular warmth, her particular refusal to stay at arm's length from difficult things. All of that belongs to the version of this year that never happened, the one where she is 65 and ordinary and still here, rather than permanently 36 and made of photographs.